Hey, Brittany.
Hi, Karen.
I'm so happy to be back with you for another episode.
Yes, the E words, my favorite time of week.
Yes, yes. And we got some juicy stuff to talk about today.
We have just been in nonstop communication, shock, awe about this situation. Now, if you have been listening to us, you know that we will always make a case for housewives. We believe in housewives as a socioeconomic, sociopolitical case study of where
Hmm.
we are in the United States, what we value, and how we engage in conflict, right?
Absolutely.
And increasingly, I would say over the past 7 or 8 years, our housewives have been making the transition from the screen to the headlines, and not always in the best way.
Unfortunately, not. It does
I
make for
think
good drama, though.
it makes for great drama. But I think the first case of this was Teresa and Joe Judice, Real Housewives of New Jersey. They both went to prison for, I believe it was tax evasion, something to that extent. And after that, we had Erica Jane and her husband, Real Housewives of
Also,
Beverly Hills.
maybe
Yes,
Jen
Tom
Shaw before
Girardi.
that.
Who?
Jen Shaw from Salt Lake City, I think
Jen
before that.
Shaw from Salt Lake City, who currently is still in prison.
Hmm.
Erica Jane did not go to prison, but her husband, her now, I believe, ex husband, is currently serving about 7 years in prison. And he is 79, I believe. Not the highlight of his twilight, right? For misappropriating client funds because he was a personal injury attorney and used a lot of the settlement funds from his clients to fund Erica Jane's lifestyle, allegedly.
Allegedly, yes.
We had Karen Huger of the Real Housewives of Potomac, who recently got out after serving 8 months in response to her fourth DUI. And now we're back in Potomac with additional news.
Yes,
So
which I don't
tell me
think.
how you felt when you heard this news. And to those listening, we're going to give you the news, but I need the reaction.
So, when the news broke about Wendy Osefo and her husband, Eddie Osefo, I was in shock. And as I analyze why I was in such shock, it's just because of how Wendy from Real Housewives of Potomac,
Yes,
um, how she normally presents herself. And these allegations were about insurance fraud.
right.
And essentially, she claimed that, you know, the family went away on a vacation to Jamaica and they came back and someone broke into their home and stole all of these items that, when investigated, was found that she had purchased them, but she also returned them and got all the money back. And so she
Yes.
was trying to profit in multiple ways, right? I was like, oh my goodness, right? Like, this is such a salacious story in so
Hmm.
many ways. So I was completely drawn in, but also because of how Wendy has presented herself on Potomac, right? She has what, 4 degrees. It was part of her, personality the entire time.
Yes.
Highly educated, teaching at Johns Hopkins, Wesleyan. She was a political commentator on the news. I forget which channel, maybe it was MSNBC or CNN, I can't recall. And she always talked about herself above everyone else, right?
Mm,
Because of her education. She talked a lot about her cultural background, with her family being from Nigeria, and also the pressures that came with that heritage in terms of being, highly educated, a highly productive member in society, etc. And so when this news came down, I was like, this is the complete opposite of how you presented yourself. So, like,
yes.
what the hell? How about you? What did you think?
I I was not, and I'll freely admit my bias, was not the biggest fan of the personality because I always want to see what else, right? So I think that there's a tendency for certain groups, eldest daughters, women of color, children of immigrants, etc., to kind of over identify with their achievements and not necessarily explore what it means to be themselves. And so over these few seasons, we've seen her explore. She wanted to make candles, homeware, have a talk show, right? There were a number of avenues. And so I was always curious to know what she wanted to be known for and how she wanted to be perceived, because it seemed like when some of these ventures weren't working out, she would then fall back on, you know, I still have these 4 degrees. And in comparison to these other women who, uh, I believe Karen Huger does not have a college degree. The other women do have a college degree. I believe she is the most degreed person on the show. She rested on those degrees in lieu of true connection. So I was always a little concerned about that.
And, I agree with you. We really didn't know much about Wendy's personality. As a matter of fact, some of the things that she did felt very shallow, right?
Right.
Throughout the season. And it was tough just really connecting with her in many different ways, right? Like, yes, she was the smartest, she presented herself as the smartest person in the room to the detriment of other people. Like, it was really kind of degrading. You can argue that point that, it makes for juicy television, which I think it absolutely did because it created that tension between the women. But I also saw her in some ways as trying to explore a new identity. Like, she kind of talked
Mhm.
about her identity being shaped by her family and her culture.
Right.
She did things because she was supposed to do that. And the Housewives show made her, in some ways, either confront that, and she wanted to kind of test out different ideas. You may think it's crazy that she would quit her job at Johns Hopkins. It's one of the most prestigious universities, right? And she basically quit her job as this commentator. She quit the things that it seemed like she was told she had to do in some way, which still
Right.
wasn't good enough for her family. And so when she tried making candles and she tried the show, I admired her experimentation. What it also showed me, though, quite clearly, particularly the candle making venture, is that she wasn't that good with money. She wasn't that good
Great
with
point.
business planning, And so, 2020 is always hindsight. You kind of look back at those moments
Right.
and you could start to see where things may have gone awry because she wanted to try these new ventures that she actually had no experience in. She had a platform, but seemingly no experience.
Right. Right. And this makes me think, especially as we're in the age of AI and a number of things, as we perceive reality TV, I'm always curious to know the line between what is real and what is not. Have you heard of simulacra?
No. Tell me.
Okay. Or simulacrum?
Tell me.
Okay. So there's a French philosopher,
Mm-hmm.
Jean Baudrillard. Please excuse me if I mispronounced his name. And so I'm reading this book, Simulacra and Simulation.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole premise is that modern society has entered a state of kind of hyper reality. And the concept focuses on this idea of copies without originals.
Mm.
And so a simulacrum or a simulacrum is a copy that represents something that either never had an original or no longer has one. And it
Mm-hmm.
leads to a world where simulations become indistinguishable from reality. And hopefully you
Okay.
see where I'm going here, right?
Okay.
Which is this, if we think about an example would be like a self-operating robot. This robot is designed to maybe operate like people,
Mm-hmm.
but there's no basis, there's no ground for it to rest upon.
Mm-hmm.
Disneyland is another example. It represents this ideal world, right? Where things are really happy and you see that or you smell, for example, there are certain scents that are released in different parts of the park that are designed to make you feel at ease or nostalgic or any of these things. It represents a world that is based on things from movies, which are themselves based on real world things. You see? So it's a copy of a copy,
Based on real world things that really aren't real.
but they aren't real.
Yeah.
So when
Got
I
it.
think, yeah, so when I think of Wendy, for example, Wendy had this identity that she came onto the show with. And with these shows, there's always a cycle, right? Someone comes on at this point. Housewives has been on for what, 20 years?
Mm-hmm.
So you would be hard pressed to find someone who isn't even casually familiar with the show. But the women that you're finding who want to be on the show now are fans of the show. And they have developed ideas around the archetypes for who's on the show, right? So in every city, you might have the matriarch, you might have the high conflict person, you may have the person who's an ingenue, and just really wants love. You may have the glam girl. These are really broad archetypes that someone at some point will occupy within each space. And so I guess when I think about Wendy, and I don't know, I haven't spoken to Wendy. I don't know if this is the
Mm-hmm.
case, but it seems like she came onto the show with an idea of how she wanted to be perceived. And then by the second season, by then people have gotten checks or they've gotten feedback on social media. And then she adopted a different personality that was designed to be authentically her. Right? She went through a few different things. So she got plastic surgery and she flaunted the plastic surgery despite the fact the previous season she shamed another woman for
Mm-hmm.
getting it. She adopted this self-identified Zen Wen,
Right.
right? Where she decided that she was now going to put out this additional persona, and she then kind of became this glam girl. And so we started to see her show up differently, wear different clothes. Her home looked different, even for like really, really casual meetings with her friends going for coffee, right? She was just decked out in glam. And so it makes me think of that concept of being a copy of a copy of a copy and not necessarily being grounded in reality, because we see, at least from what is publicly available at this point, that this is not a lifestyle that the Ocephos could maintain. So I've said a lot. I'm going to pause there, and I'm curious to know what you think.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really smart way to frame the show. And I think that we as viewers have to always remember that it's a show, but also the Housewives, which in effect are an ensemble cast based on these different archetypes and how they work together, have to remember that it's a show. I think it's an interesting format, right? Because when you think about other shows, they're created in a box. You pick your cast, they represent those archetypes, they are given all the things to play that character. Yet, this is reality TV. And so, because we use that term, we think it's all real. And the cast members have to act as if it's real, also in real life, right? So, it's where their work crosses over into their home. And so, that copy of a copy, in a sense, is necessary because although reality TV is theoretically playing yourself on television, you're not. You're not going to be able to give up exactly who you are. Who you are is not always interesting. And the fans kind of dictate in some ways how, they dictate the ratings, right? And so, a happy go lucky show with people getting along all the time, although we say we want that. We say we don't like the cat fighting and the name calling and the violence, right? When people put hands on each other. It's also the reason why we watch. And so we also call out certain aspects of their personality that we like or dislike. And so the cast members, I'm just going to use that now because that's what they are, have to dial that stuff up or dial it down which is it means they're dialing up the personality, they're dialing down the personality. And after their first season, they see what formula works, not only for them, but for the interactions that they have with the other women. I think there's also naturally, but it's also amplified, a competitive nature that breeds among the housewives. Who's the most popular? Who's the most shady? You know, those clips and memes, right? That make you famous, build your followers, get you brand deals. At the end of the day, people, in my view, are experimenting with and building their personal brands, leveraging housewives. And personal brands, although we say they should be authentic, are still curated.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing that we as viewers don't put at the forefront of our minds, because that's
Mhm.
not really the point. But when we're analyzing this critically, I think that it's something we have to always remember, and definitely supports your point around why we have a copy of a copy, right? And why those, and it's copies that keep getting made. It's not just one, right?
Yes. Yes,
And then maybe you
exactly.
forget who you are.
Because you have some housewives that they've made themselves in terms of housewives history, right? You have a woman like Nene Leakes,
Mm-hmm.
who is iconic. um, Teresa Giudice, also iconic, right? When you you see this hot-blooded Italian woman flipping over a table. Oh, like it's just something. And so people who sat back and consumed Housewives and then had the opportunity to be cast, then said, I want to be the next insert, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you mention the brand deals, you have people now on air fighting about brand deals, right? And every season, it's become unspoken but largely understood, which is you are rewarded for polarizing at the reunion show. And the reward is who gets to sit closest to Andy Cohen,
Yeah.
right? So there are always these kind of U-shaped seating, and the women who sit farthest out were not successful and likely won't be on the show again, or they may be demoted, which again has economic implications as well. And the women who were able to either be fan favorites, to be ultra polarizing, or to be Andy's favorite, they're sitting closest to him. And when we think about this copy of a copy, now I'm looking at some of the information that authorities examined when they started to wonder what was happening with the Osefos. So, uh, Eddie Osefo, Wendy's husband, gave a statement to police. He was explicitly asked whether or not any of the items on the list had been returned, and he said no. He was asked if he had other insurance, but did not disclose to his jewelry insurance and to his home insurance that he was also making a claim with another insurance company.
Mm-hmm.
For background, Eddie, not only does he have a cannabis business, he has a business consulting and management company. He is an attorney. He has an advanced degree in tax law. All of that to say, he understands the implications of lying to a law enforcement official. And this simulacra, right? Like this copy of a copy of their lifestyle, the copy that they needed to continue to uplift overrode all logic. Now, every attorney is going to tell you if you don't want it, if you don't want somebody bringing it back up, don't put it in an email.
Mm-hmm.
Do something else, communicate another way. But Eddie, in the course of the police investigation, the police were able to discover that Eddie sent an email to Wendy when he asked if there were additional high value items, and I quote, we can add to this inventory listing, i.e., Chanel shoes, other high value designer items. Before he allegedly explained, I'm trying to get the total to exceed $423,000, which is our policy maximum.
Maximum.
So when it comes to fraudulent intent, if this is in fact his email to his wife, that's it right there, right? That element is satisfied. So I'm still working through, and this happens to people every day, right? Like they're on a reality TV show, but we see people on social media that want to present a particular way. And so they will rent cars, they will, um, rent homes to give the appearance of having access and wealth that they don't have. Maybe 2 years ago, I read an article about some influencers in China, and you would have up to maybe about 20 girls that would rent a hotel. I want to say it's Bulgari has like a hotel there. And maybe 20, 30 girls would rent one room for one day and shoot all of their content there
Yeah.
and would share resources to the point that they would share the same pantyhose because these are designer pantyhose, right? And so there were certain agencies that were popping up to curate these content experiences. So they would book the hotel, whatever it is you needed, and as many content girls as could get in would then say, okay, great, I have 15 minutes in this room, I'm going to take a quick bath, I'm going to make it seem like I'm getting up in the morning, all of this to show that I live a life that I don't have, and the illusion is realer than my reality.
And I think that, it's so tricky because I would think that's fine if people didn't believe everything that they saw, right? So when we think about television and film, all of that's fake, it's curated, you have to do it in a certain amount of time. I actually think that's a smart idea in terms of pooling your resources and doing everything in one day, right? But we, as consumers of this information, have to be discerning about it, understand that there's a purpose behind it, and it's not necessarily an authentic purpose, right? They're probably trying to sell me something, get me to follow. Like, why are they doing this? And that's what we need to be as critical consumers. I think where that line becomes very dangerous is in reality television, right? Because it's the life you need to be living every single day because you've now reached celebrity status to some degree. And with the copy of a copy of a copy, right? A, we don't know who the original is, but we know with every copy you create, the image degrades. And so when we think about where Wendy and Eddie started in terms of their education and what we think they should know about stuff, right? It's kind of hard to understand why they don't. But once that starts to degrade, some of that gets left behind. They started thinking and focusing on other things, keeping up with the Joneses, right? Because that lifestyle drew them in. Again, it's something you got to do every single day of your life. You step out, your door and you go to have lunch, right? That's the persona you have to play because you don't want somebody catching you looking all crazy because that's not fitting in with the brand you're trying to promote. And I think that pressure just becomes very overwhelming. You start taking different types of risks. You have to use the platform to diversify your income, which is great, but you really still have to be smart about doing things in some really steady, traditional ways. And it just becomes a vicious cycle because the more famous or popular you become or want to become, the more you have to invest in that personality and shed
Right.
some of the old personality. And maybe that's what's happening. I can see it happening just in general, just talking about it. We don't know, really what they're thinking. But we have seen Wendy's transformation over
Mhm.
the past few seasons, and it is all about the glam,
Right.
no longer about her intellect as much.
Yeah. Do you think that is because, and I would imagine that this is born of some inherent desire, right? To be this.
Yeah.
We see that she's struggling with, again, meeting external expectations, and it seems like at her heart, right? Maybe Wendy wanted to be a baddie. I don't know. As we look forward, what do you think the path is when it comes to our framework, when it comes to eudaimonia, when it comes to really applying these virtues to our life, what do you think the path forward is in the face of hyperreality?
I think you need to understand your own personal reality and stay grounded in who you are. You can evolve, you can grow, you can change. You could be different in different circumstances because it calls for that. But what is your foundation for who you are and who you want to be and how you want to show up each day? You can't get lost in that, because your best tool in your toolkit is your own authenticity. And I just want people to like me for who I am. I'm flawed. I can be annoying, right, and aggravating at times. But am I always that way? I don't think so. But I don't try to be, and I receive feedback.
Right.
And I can accept it or not accept it, and move through life, in that way. You also have to be cognizant of what's going to throw you off and be able to manage whatever that is, whether that's that's emotions, usually it's emotions, right? Which is going to throw you off course and disrupt how you want to show up in the world. So I think it's really just about staying grounded, and all of those pressures and all of the things that are going to draw you out, those temptations will always be there, but it's just about how you respond to them. They're not going to go away.
Mm.
I think on a high level, that's how I think about it.
I like that.
How about you?
I like that. Someone recently asked me a question about humanity, and
Mm.
I can't remember the exact question, but the question was something to the effect of, what's something that we forget about humanity? And my response was that we're limitless. And I think in the age of AI, there's always that desire to do a switch out and replace instead of augment the human experience. But remembering that AI is borrowing from the human experience, right? And its ability to be generative is largely based on its ability to consume human made creations. That means it's going to get to a point, right? It's just going to get to a point where it's come to every derivation of every human made book ever. But we've not reached that point with humans. And I think we're pretty limitless. And so, to your point about authenticity, I would hope that we remember it's okay to be in the messy middle. It's okay to not have this perfectly curated, hyper reality, ultra produced version of our lives.
Yeah,
And that's probably where the value is.
that's the value in being human at the end of the day.
Yeah. Listen, Pinocchio went through a whole lot to become a real boy, okay?
Well, I will keep my eyes glued to
Yes.
see what happens with the Ocephos.
Yes.
In particular, I'm mostly interested not just for the high drama, but their children,
Exactly.
the little humans that had nothing to do with this. And so, I wish their family the best. I hope they learn something from this.
Agreed.
And, we'll see what the outcome is. And it'll just be interesting watching this season, given what we know now. More ratings for
Such a
Bravo.
it is such a meta experience. It's odd.
Oh,
Very
gosh.
odd.
All right. We'll keep the viewers posted.
We will. Bye.
Bye.